professor at Stanford who was interested in finding out how the Hagia Sophia was before, when it was a church, because it was built in order for people to sing at church and for the acoustics to be in a particular way. And they wanted to find out how it would be like to sing these hymns in church. So these two professors went to the Hagia Sophia and they popped a balloon. And they were able to record that balloon popping and replicate this in the studio and make it sound like, so when people are singing, they would record it in the studio, but it would sound like it was recorded in the Hagia Sophia with all the acoustics. I will share that link with you. So
We should share it. You should.
They were able to like replicate those sounds, so they were able to have like all the acoustics of this place electronically.
Yes, because when sound reverberates from the walls, it can tell you exactly about the space and what everything else would sound like if recorded in this place. Yeah. So it's so cool.
I didn't know people were doing that, because that's very interesting.
It's very interesting.
That's a big development in music, to be able to replicate that type of stuff.
Exactly. So I heard that first time I heard it was on NPR, the National Public Radio in the US, and I was so fascinated by this, because this is something that I am interested in. So yeah, tell me, what would you like to...
Okay, so welcome back to The World Is Yours with myself and Leo.
Yeah.
And today we're with Dr. Abir Ward.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you.
Thank you, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for being our first guest.
Yes, exactly.
It's an honor.
We're still getting the kinks out of this, but we're very happy to be able to have a discussion with you, because you have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, and you specialize in linguistics, right?
Applied linguistics, which is slightly different. It is it studies the effect of language on everything around us, basically. Yeah.
Which is a very interesting topic. Like I wish I had the mental capacity to like study this stuff personally, because it is amazing the effect that language has on everything we do, but we use it every day, so we don't think about it in a, I guess, more specific sense and how it affects us.
Actually, my background is not in linguistics. I started in literature first, and I've always wanted to be a teacher or a researcher. And I was born in West Africa, Liberia, and was raised there. I came to Lebanon at an older age. I was taught Arabic at home by my mom, who insisted that I learn the language. And it's funny, because when you learn a language at home, it's very different from when you learn it formally, especially when you rarely hear people speak this language, so it becomes a bit abstract. And then when I came to Lebanon, I was very hesitant to speak Arabic, because people made fun of my accent in Arabic.
Yeah, they have that effect. They do have that effect. You're like, am I wrong? Am I wrong?
Yeah,
no.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have to speak or pronounce certain words, the way everyone says these words. And on the other hand, I had to lose my accent in English, because I was also made fun of for speaking, yes.
Yeah, okay. I think I had a similar thing when I transitioned from Egypt, which, like you said, it was like a different type of Arabic, to Lebanon. And I had the same thing, and I was like shy a bit from like my accent. I was like, okay, am I saying right? What am I? It's Arabic.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you guys? It's okay. It's the same word, different meaning. And it was a whole other experience, just like you were mentioning.
That's the most difficult part, I think, about learning a language. At least for me, you're so self-conscious about the way you think you're going to speak, that like sometimes I choose not to speak French or Arabic at all, because I'm so self-conscious about the way people are going to think that I'm speaking.
Exactly.
But the thing about language is you can't learn unless you practice. So you kind of have to make those mistakes, and you have to put yourself in that terrible position of being made fun of in order to learn it.
Yeah. One interesting thing is that even if you speak French with an accent and you're in France, people would still understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Whereas in English, if you are in the US, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, So if you speak with a slight accent, people have a difficulty understanding what you're trying to say. And so this makes you a little bit more self-conscious of the way you're speaking, etc. I even faced difficulty when I first went to the US. I was around 19. And it was very weird for me because I felt that they were speaking a different language. And some of my classmates, because I went there for college, some of my classmates used to say I sound like a book. So, my language is very formal. How do you sound like a book, right? Or that they detect an accent and then they wonder, like, where are you from? Where are you from? Or, you know.
Yeah, that's something that's very common in the US, because in America, people are only really exposed to the way that, you know, people around them speak English. And there's a lot of like uniformity in that. And they're not exposed to different accents, and especially different languages. So if you speak English in any different type of way, it's just so foreign to them.
It's going to baffle them. They're going to be like, okay, where are you from?
Yeah, where are you from? The one place I did not face any sort of like negative discrimination, and I use the word negative discrimination because when you discriminate, it doesn't mean that you're being discriminatory. Those are two different words. To discriminate is to tell how two things are different from one another. Whereas when you're being discriminatory, you're favoring one thing over another. So when I was in Montana, of all places, people could not tell that they could tell I was different, not because of my accent, but because of my eye color. Everyone had blue eyes.
I'm not really familiar with Montana.
It was amazing.
She's not from here.
Like, she's not from here, but because it's because of her eye color.
So tell us a bit about your academic background. Like how did you get to studying what you are now?
I was very lucky. Ever since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to become a teacher, and I was very curious by nature as a child.
So how does one come up to the point where they know they want to become a teacher?
Yeah.
Like what?
So you're teaching the teddy bears and the couches, and you know you line up your family and you insist that they sit there and listen to you speak and teach them about something that you've learned at school. No, actually, I'm kidding. This is one thing. I think every kid does that, you know, to a certain extent.
At one point,
at one point or another. But I don't know. I was always fascinated by being able to not just learn something, but teach it to other people. And this started with me from an early age. I also knew I wanted to be a researcher because I had a ton of questions always going on. And we did not have Google during my time. So I'm very curious by nature. And I knew that I wanted to become a teacher and or a researcher. Of course, you know, when I was a kid, when I was 9 or 10, I wanted to become work for NASA, like everyone else. But I was very lucky that when I was in high school, my mom, through an NGO that she started and brought a researcher in a field. I can't remember her field. Her name was Dr. Huda Bibi, and she gave us a test in career orientation, I think, something like that, where she gives you a test, and tells you exactly what you should be majoring in.
But are these tests actually accurate? I've
hers
done like a ton myself.
Hers was very accurate.
Okay.
And when I took it, I got three majors. I was supposed to either teach English language, or English literature, or design advertisements and write the words for ads. So I was so happy because it gave me a focus. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I felt that this is my calling, because it is a calling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then because I succeeded as a result, I wanted to do the same thing for others. So one of the things that I do right now to give back to society is I try to locate the test, and I found it. and I now give it to people for free, like
to know themselves,
children,
what they
children of my friends or my daughter's friends, or some students that I feel are struggling with deciding on a major.
That's very important.
And I have some amazing success stories as a result. And you know how I know that I am in the right field and doing the right thing?
The impact you're doing.
I just love being in the classroom. When I'm there, it doesn't matter, rain or shine, whether I'm sick, of course not COVID.
Yeah.
I am there and I am so happy.
Wow.
And students can sense it. So the other day, it was the second time I meet with my students last week, and they said, we can tell how much you love your job. So that was enough for me.
You can really tell. You can, and I commend you for what you do, because what you said just like really made me happy, because I didn't think people like cared like that anymore, and especially when it comes to people at a younger age, you have so much pressure put on you at a younger age now. People, I think, younger people feel like they have more to accomplish at a younger age, especially now with younger people becoming more prevalent in society, and they run multi-billion-dollar companies. And young people feel like, what am I going to do? I don't even know what I want to do yet. And look at these people, they're already accomplishing so much because they're idolized in society.
Yeah, and it's not just like that. It's also because younger people now, they just want to look up forward to someone.
Yeah.
Like they want someone to look forward to and be like impacted by their energy. And I think that's very important, because I think in my experience, I've had like a lot of professors and a lot of teachers, but I think what they lack is the energy they give in class. And you can really tell whether a teacher actually is teaching out of love for teaching, or is teaching, or is actually just reading, you know, and that really makes up a big difference.
And that's reflected in their students too, which I'm sure, like you said, it is with yours. And
I tell students, this is what I tell them. I say, do you love your major? And some of them are usually like, you know, I chose this because my parents wanted me to major in this, or because my friends said this is the best thing, or, you know, all my friends were going to AB, so I went to AB, or... It's
very bad. It's very bad to make up a decision based on your parents.
Of course. So I tell them, I say, have you ever taken a course with a teacher you absolutely hate? And they say, yes. I say, imagine being in a job 9 to 5, and this job consists of being in that classroom with that teacher every single day for the rest of your life. Do you want to do that? And they say no. And then I say, you have to change your major then. And I say, it doesn't matter what you do, even if you become a recluse officer, worker, like you are working, sorting out garbage. It doesn't matter as long as you love your job.
Success for me, for instance, it differs from one person to another. And people are just, nowadays, they're very short-sighted, and they just want that short-term success, or whatever their friends are doing, and they're getting, oh my God, they're doing amazing results and whatever. And they're not really thinking about the long term, and that is what you were mentioning, being passionate about what they're doing and loving what they're doing.
Like for example, one student one time told me to really emphasize what you're saying. She said, I said, what do you want to be in the future? She said, I want to be an influencer. And I said, well, you have to have something first that you do very well, so you can influence people. For me, my success story, I think, is seeing my students succeed and making a difference in somebody's life. Whether it's helping them be on the right track, or overcoming a difficulty. Like I had a student who had difficulties with public speaking, and she said, please absolve me of having to deliver a speech at the end of the semester in your course. And I said, is this a problem for you? And she said, yes. I said, well, let's make a deal. So from now until the end of the semester, you come once a week to my office, and then we sit and work on your public speaking skills. And then by the end of the semester, if you're not ready to deliver, then it's fine. And she said, I'll do that. Anything you want. And by the end of the semester, she was confident enough to give a speech. And not only that, she ended up getting a job with Ernst & Young.
EY.
Just doing this, promoting the business, to the younger generation, and this is all she does for a living right now. She's speaking in public.
Wow.
But of course, it took a lot of effort and commitment and dedication. And when you're not passionate about your job, you're not going to do that. And if you're passionate about the job, it doesn't matter if you're getting paid for it or not, you do it.
Yeah.
And you love it, and you feel that you've made a difference in someone's life. So this is it.
There's no doubt that students of yours was able to become a good speaker because you actually have trained for TEDx speaking, right?
I do.
Yes.
I train, I've trained in the past TEDx speakers, starting with TEDx LAU, which is a big success, and then with TEDx AUB.
Yeah. We were just talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's very interesting actually, because people watch that type of stuff and they see it and they're like, oh, this is very interesting. But I think it is very difficult for those people to talk sometimes. Not everybody, you can be smart, but you cannot, it can be hard to articulate the way you think sometimes. So you allow people to use what they know and express it, which is very important. So how do you do that?
Well, for us to when we're thinking TEDx, we're thinking it's 50% content and 50% delivery. We cannot make a full speaker out of somebody in just a couple of sessions or training sessions. So they have to meet us halfway. I can help somebody become a speaker over a period of time if they train with me, but of course you have to have the content. There is one TED talk that's super funny, where the person says absolutely nothing, and he delivers the best talk, and it's hilarious, and he's basically saying nothing, and he says, I'm not saying anything right now, but it's the tone of voice that I'm using that's making a difference, and you might think that I'm saying something important, but in fact I'm not. And he continues the entire talk that way. It's about the delivery. So it's 50% delivery, 50% content. But let me tell you what the secret of my success training people is. Do you want to know?
Tell us.
The fact that I am petrified of public speaking.
And you're here. And you're here.
Can you believe that?
So how is that a secret for you? How does that help you?
It makes me a much better trainer because I understand the fear.
Understand the barriers that you have to push.
You can sympathize with what they're feeling, and
not
you can put yourself in their shoes.
Yes, of course. Yeah. I can sympathize for sure, but it's not just that. It's knowing the right tools to employ in order to overcome these fears.
Of course.
And this is what makes me a good public speaking trainer.
And I think that's very important, especially in the sense that while teaching, you're also kind of like coaching the person in your classroom, and not just coaching them about like the lesson, but coaching them about life. And
I do a lot.
Exactly, and I think that's what we need to incorporate. I think teachers should really be coaches as well, because students typically see their teachers more than they see their parents. Yeah. And I think that can really give them a boost in what they're about to do later on and what they're about to go. And that's one thing I wanted to discuss with you about your research, which is the teacher's identity perceived by students.
Yeah, of course. So when you're working towards this kind of a project, and the byproduct is learning how to write, whether it's a feasibility report, a letter of transmittal, executive summary, because it's technical writing. Yeah. You're learning, you're saying, okay, so my end goal is this, but along the way, I'm going to learn how to write. And this completely changes the game for the student.
Changes the whole course.
The entire dynamics of the course. Plus, it invites people to collaborate. Whereas before, we somehow pit students against each other by saying, okay, there's this highest grade in class and whoever gets it. And what's the point? The point is in teaching people how to work in teams and groups to collaborate. Your future is collaboration, whether you're working at a company or a school, university, whatever it is, wherever you are, you're never going to work on a project alone. So you'd better start right now learning how to collaborate.
Yeah.
And one thing about projects,
Yeah.
is that a lot of times it's not fair. And like the
workload.
Yeah, sometimes I experience that a lot. And sometimes the burden of the work gets on one person, and your teammates just sit and relax.
One of the things is that if you make students responsible for each other's learning, and this is a very difficult thing. So let me go back a bit. When I first joined AUB, one of the things that I noticed is that we do not have communities. Students are in competition. So one of my course learning outcomes was to create a community or a support network. So this is very important for me. And I tell students at the beginning of the semester, I tell them, look around, look at the faces of the people in this classroom. You're going to become lifelong friends. And because I've been teaching for such a long time, I know that this is a reality. They're collaborating, working together, etc. So there are so many ways to deal with the problem of offloading or having somebody else do the work in your place. The entire the way the course is designed does not allow for that. In a sense. So and the other project that I work on with the other students is Turath, which I started in 2019. So in 2019, I was at this conference at the Digital Humanities Institute at AUB, and I was having a conversation with our librarians at AUB, and they said, well, guess what? We do not have a lot of articles about important figures from the Renaissance period in Lebanon on Wikipedia. I said, that's not good. They said, yeah, we don't, those authors are not there. And because the curriculum was changed, I think in the late 90s, those people were removed from the Lebanese curriculum, and they remain, their work remains in books on shelves in libraries, but they're not on the internet. Wow. So you guys have never heard of them.
Yeah, I think some of the names you mentioned one time at the Wikipedia editathon, and I was like, who are these?
Who are these people? Yes.
Who are they?
That's very important, by the way, because coming from America and studying here, I wanted to be exposed to languages and culture coming here.
Yeah.
But in the Lebanese education systems, you are not taught anything about Lebanese history, or at least I wasn't. Being in the IB classes and being in American classes here, I was never taught a single thing about Lebanese history. And I was very disappointed about that, because I felt like I was missing out, because there is a lot of substance in that subject.
Oh yeah, big time. So when I discovered this, I was lucky. So here, success is opportunity meeting preparedness. So I happened to have a professor in my PhD program who is a Wikipedia expert, and I approached him that summer. I said, so Dr. Vetter, his name is Matthew Vetter. I said, Dr. Vetter, so there's this and that. And he said, wow, this is important. What are you going to do? I said, I'm thinking of involving my students in documenting and digitizing our heritage in a sense. And he said, well, you know what? I'm going to put you in touch with Helene Blumenthal from Wikipedia Education. They started this platform 9 years ago, and she might be able to help you. And I said, well, that's great. He emailed her, and she responded almost immediately and said, well, I don't know, I've never heard of the American University of Beirut. And we don't even work with institutions outside of the US. Well, we do, we have Canada, but outside of North America, we don't have anyone. I said, well, we're going to be the first, and we did.
When I learned about this project like a month and a half ago, I was very surprised that something like this existed. And it made me very happy to see that things like this were being done, especially with a big company like Wikipedia. Like one of the most impactful, information websites in the world.
It's huge.
Being able to work with them to distribute lost information or information that's not accessible to everyone.
What we're doing with Wikipedia is not just preserving our heritage and putting ourselves on the map. We're also helping them bridge the gender gap because it's well documented in Wikipedia. We're also trying to contribute by having more women editors. And we're also challenging them and their, like, for example, let me give you one example. One of the things that we rely on in Lebanon is oral history. So stories that our grandparents and great-grandparents have told us, we say over and over again, and we tell our children, and this is where some of our proverbs come from, and all that. If you are writing an article in Wikipedia and you say, well, it's through an interview with somebody that I got this information, they refuse it immediately. So some of my work is not just, they've extended a helping hand and they're helping us do all this work. But some of the work that I'm doing or we're doing is fighting back, saying we should be able to write about these people that you do not consider notable just because they don't have an existence on the web, because that's the whole purpose of the work, is to document the lives of these notable figures because they do not have an existence on the web. So there's this back and forth that's going on there. And so I was able to get a fellowship with Wikipedia through 4C's Wikipedia. And we're working on this translation issues, writing with Wikipedia, and how do we do that? And at the same time, we started Turath, the lovely initiative, and we chose the word Turath because it means heritage, patrimony, and we turned it into a verb form by writing it as T-O to Rath. So it's to preserve our digital heritage. And we changed 2 to number 2 for digitization. And your brother is he's a big key figure in Turath.
I think
and not to Faisal.
I think one thing that I was really baffled by, and it's when you were presenting the Wikipedia editathon, and you talked about how we don't really have a presence on Wikipedia. And it was just like you were mentioning in the US and Canada, like they were mainly responsible for the information conveyed there. And I was like, okay, the information regarding us, we do not control.
Yes.
And that's so easy to like erase a big, huge like gap of culture, heritage, and because you're not taking part of it. We weren't taking part of it, and that's very important to try to preserve that.
Ignorance is spread exactly like that. When you don't have the facilities to report on your own heritage and your own information. In the US specifically, so many countries are misrepresented because they are being represented by Western media.
Of course,
And it's that representation, like, these countries are not presenting themselves in any sort of way. It is all Americans' interpretations of them, and that's why many people can view Americans as ignorant with global issues.
That's true. Even though they're not, it's not their fault.
It's not their fault.
And I want to tell you about the Mont Smith Act, which forbids all the media that is being produced by the U.S. for foreign countries to be aired in the US, and this was taking place for the longest time since 1947 or 48. Look it up, it's unbelievable. I think they just were able to reverse this maybe a couple years ago, but we still don't know. So everything that is produced by embassies, for example, from certain TV stations and radio stations like Al Hurra, for example, here, you're not supposed to air this within the US. They're not supposed to find out what kind of publicity that's happening. That's crazy. It's, imagine how sheltered and shielded they are from knowing what's going on around the world because of acts like that. Let me take you back to language. So in that piece that I was telling you about, where I write about language teacher identity, I say in the opening epigraph something. I talk about learning various languages, and I say knowing several languages is like being able to take a look at a tree and see it from different angles. So I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the tree, but knowing different languages allows me to see it from like different perspectives. And this is what adds richness to one's life, is having this diversity, because there are certain expressions in particular languages that cannot be captured. There are no synonyms for them in other languages. And to tie it back to applied linguistics, because I was telling you earlier that applied linguistics is different from linguistics. So one very interesting study that a professor, I can't remember, I think it's Daniel Young, I have to look it up again. So he did this study, he was at UCLA, and he did this longitudinal study over several years to see whether, or the effect of the language that we speak on our spending habits. So are we likely to save money, not gain weight, because of the language we speak? And he found out that yes,
there is a correlation.
There is this. He did not call. He was very careful about calling it a correlation, but he said there is this impact that the language that you speak has on your spending habits. So, for example, if the language you speak has a hard future tense, let's say you're speaking German or Chinese, you're more likely to save than if you speak, for example, English or even Arabic. Take, for example, the word bukra, which means tomorrow. In Arabic, bukra means in 24 hours, in a couple of days, next week, in the near future, in the far future. Bukra when you graduate, bukra when you get married and have kids. Bukra is no longer about tomorrow.
I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago about how gender is perceived through the languages you speak.
Of course.
Because genderfied languages, it is now common knowledge that genderfied languages affect their populations and the way they perceive things.
I have a lot of hesitation on this point when it comes to Arabic, for example, because
there aren't any
everything in Arabic has a gender. So it could be a cup is a has a feminine So but think of one thing. I want to give you one example. In Arabic, a guy can sing a song to his lover and sound like he's addressing another man. It can work for both. And I love this because this kind of fluidity is allows for different interpretations, so I can interpret it any way I want. So when a male singer is singing and saying بحبك, it might mean that he's addressing another man, but it can also mean that he's addressing a woman.
So the neutrality allows both, like anyone, to be able to perceive it in the way that they want, which is important which is
very important. But definitely language. Besides this, language is very discriminatory. Very discriminatory and very much against women in specific. In so many ways. I've also written a piece.
For me, for instance, Arabic, I think you said something about it being neutral and like the message, like there is a fluidity in the message. But for me, I think Arabic is one of those languages that just has everything. Like there is genderized, So like how do you convey? Like, how is it that fluid? I just couldn't wrap my head around it.
I'm not a linguist, as I said. I'm an applied linguist. But take for example the fact that we have so many nouns in Arabic. Right. So for example, the word God, Allah. We have 99 words for God. Right. Or for lion. Or for sword, so you have all these different nouns, and they're not synonyms. Each one conveys a different meaning. And Arabic is one of the largest languages containing nouns. When it comes to vocabulary. English is very rich with verbs. This is why I say English is the business language of the world, because it indicates action, and there's movement. It's not static. Whereas Arabic,
it's not descriptive
it's very descriptive, right?
You see that I personally love body language, and I read a lot of body language. You can see one of my books up there. So when it comes to body language, you can see the difference when people speak in Arabic. When people speak Arabic, because I notice this a lot, because I can't understand they're moving everything, and they're expressing themselves. Their hands are open. If you see people speak English, when I talk to Lebanese people in Arabic, in English, I can see that they're like constricting themselves. They're not moving. But as soon as they talk to other people in Arabic, they become a completely different person physically.
I use this example when I'm teaching public speaking courses. I talk about how in the West, for example, in the US, people are not about gesturing. And then in the Arab world, we're all about gestures, especially if you're delivering a poem in Arabic, which is what we call istizhar. So you have to stand there, and then you have to do all this. And then notice in India, for example, there's a lot of head movement, head bobbing, right? Yeah. And so you have Iran, for example, which is in the middle, and then they use both. So my Iranian friends, they do both the head and the hands, and I just love it. You notice even the ones who live or have lived in the US for a long time, you have like Maz Jobrani, for example, when he's talking in Iranian and Farsi, so when he uses Farsi to talk, he's always doing the head bob with the hand gestures. It's amazing. I love it. And so I noticed when Hillary Clinton was running, in the last presidential elections, somebody, because she's
stiff.
In a sense, and she is. Somebody must have told her, just gesture a little bit. And I remember one time I was listening to her, and she said something, and after she finished saying it. In her speech, we must do this, and then she remembered that she needs to gesture, and then she did the fist in the air. It was a little bit late, and I think this is why people perceived her as
robotic,
dishonest. It's because of the fact that her body language did not correlate with her words.
Body language is one of the most difficult things to hide. Scientifically, that's something that I've read a lot into, because hiding your body language is extremely difficult to do. Because if you are thinking something, you will express it at some point physically. But if you are trying to change your body language, and if you are actively thinking about how you are moving, then it will not look natural.
Oh, of course.
Because it's an innate thing, it comes from the very back of your mind, and it's not something.
The brain affects your body language, but your body language also affects the brain. So Amy Cuddy, who used to be a behavioral psychologist at Harvard School of Business, did a lot of studies on this, on the other end of, like, the opposite, the effect of your body on your brain. And she's famous for the power posing things, so if you power pose for 2 minutes, she says, so if you stand like Superman or Wonder Woman or in that position for 2 minutes, or make yourself look larger and bigger, your brain will secrete testosterone, so your testosterone levels will go up, and your cortisol levels will go down. And you're more likely, not only do you feel more confident, so you should do that before a job interview or before public speaking, but she says that you are perceived differently. You're perceived as more confident.
Do you perceive yourself differently?
You perceive yourself, but others perceive you. They're more likely to hire you if they think you look more confident. Yes?
I feel it.
Wow, that's actually very interesting.
Yeah, she has a TED talk about this, so you should
watch
that.
We should watch
Amy
that.
Cuddy,
I have a question, and it's a bit off topic from what we're talking right now, but my question is regarding to what extent do certain languages are restrictive, because some languages you can literally, like you were mentioning, express yourself in the most detailed way possible, and while others, they're very kind of restrictive in that manner.
I'm not sure I can answer this question based on my research. So I'm not an authority figure, so I cannot really answer this question. But I can tell you I don't think there is a language that is restrictive, because otherwise it would have grown or died. Right? Because people need to express,
Yeah,
right?
true.
Or maybe on the other hand, every language is restrictive. Otherwise, nobody would paint or do music or creative
very
arts.
true.
But this is not an expert
I
opinion.
get you,
This is
I
just
understand.
my opinion.
In preparation for this interview, I actually read a lot of things that said that like the languages are restrictive, but in certain senses. Like in aspects of language, you can be restricted in some areas. So if you're talking about something that, because languages elaborate on some aspects and they minimize some others. So like if you're speaking, like the research I was talking to you about, I can't source it, I'm sorry, I forgot. But people...
A well-documented research states that...
Can you tell me
We
the
act like
source
we're on 60
that?
So genderfied countries were basically people associated feminine feelings and they associated femininity with words that were genderfied for women. And they asserted, dominant feelings and like masculine feelings with words that were masculine. So when people were surveyed in genderfied countries, ones that had genderfied languages viewed objects much differently based on the genderfication, which I think is really important in terms of inequality too, because that is it's a bad bias that people have, that they should associate, dominance and masculinity and being strong with, masculine words, and the opposite with feminine.
I'm sure it has an effect. I still haven't conducted. I was asked to write an article for Jasad. Have you ever heard of Jasad? It was started by Jumana Haddad, and she asked me a few months ago, but I was working on finalizing my dissertation. I was getting ready for my PhD defense, so I couldn't do that. But this is something that I will look into and then come back here and tell you more about it. But what I can tell you is that in applied linguistics, when we study corpora, or we do corpus linguistics, so we're studying large sums of data. There are so many interesting findings that might not correlate to or be related directly to whatever you're saying, but let me share with you this interesting fact.
Okay.
So they found out in one study, and I read this in the journal Scientific Study of Literature, which is edited by my dissertation advisor, Dr. David Hanauer. And so that issue, when I read it, it just struck a chord with me. It says that authors, literary authors, who overuse the first personal pronoun, I, are more likely to commit suicide than others.
Wow.
Just
So
because they used the I, the pronoun I.
we don't know. We could show this through science and research. What are the reasons? We need to talk to psychologists. That would be a study that I'm so interested in doing in the future, which is not just seeing what are the reasons, because it could spring from anything. It could be because they are so into themselves or self-centered. It could.
It could cause like self-consciousness, being referring to yourself so many times.
Or maybe because you are in this mental state, you refer to yourself. Whereas, for other people, they are more connected to others or to the world. So it could be
being isolated.
Being isolated. Wow. I'm not sure, but what I am really interested in is in finding whether the reverse is true. So if you have people who are, who have depression or suicidal tendencies, and you go with, you help them do some writing exercises where they eliminate the first personal pronoun. I'm interested in seeing what the results would be.
Or maybe if you have somebody that is going through something like that, referring to them not as you, but we.
Yes, that would be, or maybe using some the third personal pronoun, like talking about he or she or they or them, or so whatever it is, but trying to make them reshift or shift their focus or change their perspective I would like to see or whether there will be a result.
That is very interesting.
Isn't
And now,
it?
now I'm waiting for your research on this because
it's not going to be just research. It's going to be a whole project. I'm betting.
Yeah, it's like, can I join you on working
finding
on
those
this?
associations is so interesting. When you find like an association, like just a word, and somebody's perspective on their own life, down to a word.
Yes, exactly. Isn't that amazing? And
Yeah.
it is thanks to corpus linguistics and being able to gather that much data and study it and come up with these conclusions. It's just amazing.
It is.
And thanks to computers, of course, and all these programs out there that help us analyze this data.
Our development as a society has allowed us to do things like this. And people say like, oh, I wish we used to live like in the 50s. That was the time. No, like you couldn't think about having stuff like this be discovered. It wasn't a possibility back then. But now you have all of these fields and the collaboration between all of these fields, which allows for this type of stuff to happen. Which is why we wanted to have you on, because you have, you're rounded in the sense of you apply languages with other things, and you show a correlation between stuff, and you show how people express themselves too, which is the most important part, in society, is how people express themselves and in what format they do it.
In Arabic, we say al-insan hayawan natiq, so human is a speaking animal, and I think this is amazing because this is our form of communication. It is elaborate, it is well advanced, and then you look at the neural connections that are happening in the brain, and on top of that, the plasticity of the brain that allows you to unlearn and relearn all over again. So I have a friend who when I was an undergraduate at San Jose State University in California, she was much older than I am, but she was a good friend, and she had multiple strokes, and that caused a lot of damage in her brain in the area responsible for languages. So she had to learn language all over again. So she had to learn it through song, because song, how when you listen to a song and you memorize the lyrics, it gets stored in a different area, independent of the language area. So she had to learn language through song all over again. Not only was she successful, she was able to complete her master's in history after she's had the strokes, after she's lost her ability to speak.
That's amazing.
So that in itself is just crazy. And for somebody like me, and by the way, I didn't tell you this before, somebody like me who is neurodiverse, and by this I mean that I have learning difficulties.
Oh, okay.
So so growing up, I'm dyslexic and I have ADD. So I used to think, of course, like anybody who is neurodiverse, that I was stupid, especially because I was interested in literature. And it took me forever to finish reading something, and so discovering that this is not a weakness. Yes, it is a hindrance, but this is not a
difficulty in trying to get to your goals. Yeah.
Yes, of course.
It's not a weakness. Of course.
It's not a weakness because number one, it allows, because my brain is, because of ADD. My brain is jumping all over the place and is able to make these crazy connections. This is one thing. And the second thing is, when I have a neurodiverse student in class, I'm helping them because I know exactly where they are. I can exactly know and understand what they're going through and what they require, the kind of support, help. And not only that, I can see, I have tested tools. Because I went through this and I've developed coping mechanisms and tools and to deal with this. So I help them by introducing them to these tools and seeing how this works.
But for instance, ADD, you mentioned ADD, and I can't really. I was astonished right now when you said you had ADD because
and stage fright and
because the level of focus you have, and ADD basically just lets you be someone who's all over the place.
Are
and
you
you're
kidding?
Very focused.
How
is that possible?
I'm not very focused.
You are.
Yeah,
you
two things that I do. I'll tell you, I meditate, but I'll talk about this in a second.
Yeah.
I knit or crochet or paint or draw or do something kinesthetic.
Okay.
So I am moving my hands, but crocheting is amazing because I have to count. Otherwise, if I lose count,
you're not going to like.
It's messy.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly here, right? Because I'm constantly counting and paying attention and following the pattern. So this helps my ideas get organized. Of course, granted, a few years ago, I enrolled in an inner engineering program, and I learned a meditation technique or tool, and it's called Shambhavi Mahamudra, whereby you sit for 21 minutes and you breathe properly. And this is unbelievable. Was
that effective?
Oh, wow.
In terms of what was it effective?
First of all, I'm going to tell you one benefit, just one benefit, in addition to the,
to the
tens
many others
of benefits that I've experienced as a result. It helped me recognize or become aware of this gap between my overactive brain and my consciousness. So if I am aware and conscious, I am here, right? So I am aware of what's going on, and that little tiny gap between my awareness and my overthinking brain is a blessing, because then I can recognize when my brain is overthinking, and I can just observe it and let it be. Okay, you want to overthink, but is it going to dictate how I'm feeling and how they behave? Exactly. So this is one thing. Plus, because I'm interested in neuroscience, remember? So I'm following Andrew Huberman and, what he does, the kind of work he does in his lab. We have Dr. Arish Dao at AUB. We have Dr. Long at Long Lab at NYU. So they're talking about the brain. But in particular, Andrew Huberman, when he talks about the importance of breathing, the breaths that you take, you take breathing for granted. You think you're doing it, that's it, your body is already doing it. I don't have to pay attention to it. But if you pay attention to how you breathe. So in one of his podcasts, he talks about how, I don't think it was his research, but somebody else's research. He says they have been able to show that if you take a deep breath and you take another deep breath on top of it, like another one,
like a full deep breath.
Full deep breath, but like twice.
You're compacting
your brain secretes testosterone. So just this little breathing technique, and you have changed the chemistry of your brain. Right. So your brain is secreting something more of something that you might need. That, and plus other things. He said, like, if you regulate your breathing, how that changes everything. So tapping into that at one point in my life through meditation was just transformational in so many different ways.
In addition to what you were saying, I think meditation is something that's very important and should be really implemented in schools across the world. Because not only does it give you this, like you said, like redefined structure of your body, but it also gives you relaxation. So I think what I was saying, I think meditation should really be incorporated in schools, because they would really help children be more focused, more relaxed, take things one thing at a time.
For me personally, like having a second to like just taking 5 minutes to breathe and to like focus. Like I used to be a terrible insomniac, and I could go days without sleeping. But what I learned how to do is breathe before I sleep. I spend 5 minutes just taking deep breaths, and I fall asleep right after. And like being able to put your like focus on nothing and just breathe really helps you, which is why I think like that type of stuff is important. And what other research are you doing?
Nothing so far. Well, actually, I would be very interested in getting involved in research that has to do with language acquisition and neurological pathways particular. I'm sure so many people are working on this, but this is something that I'm interested in exploring further, especially because I study literacy practices of multilingual people, right? And so it's important for me to study this from various perspectives, because unfortunately research that's being done in the US when it comes to the other, right? So if you have the native speaker, or we don't call them native speakers anymore, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So, but you know, you have the person who speaks English as a first language, and then everybody else is lumped into one homogeneous group and called L2 speaker, or speaker of English as a second language.
Yeah.
And I think this is very problematic. And for somebody like me who's interested in social justice, interested in linguistic injustice, interested in language in general and power relations, I think this is super important to not only be aware of, but also combat or fight in a way. Because we cannot study the different groups the same way. And take, for example, Lebanon. Lebanon is a barren land when it comes to research, but from an applied linguistics perspective, it should be a very important place to study, because all the different factors or variables are controlled. We're all living in the same country under the same economic or in the same economic situation and socio-political dynamics, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So, and you have all these distinct linguistic groups, the Arabic speaking groups who just go to school and study Arabic. I mean, they do study a foreign language, but they primarily converse in Arabic. And then you have the English speaking group who study English maybe as a second language, or maybe like you study English as a first language. And then you have the French speaking group, and then you have also a fourth group and other smaller groups. But you have the Armenians who speak Armenian at home, go to school, learn Arabic and French, and then end up at AUB studying, for example, or LAU, or studying in English. So you have all these beautiful, distinct groups who live in the same country and are, you know, all these different variables are controlled.
Yeah.
So this is a prime place to study.
Exactly, for all its diversity.
Yes.
And,
it's not found in many other places where you have this level of diversity in linguistics, especially in school.
Especially in schools, yes. Especially given the fact that, for example, for science researchers, the group that I studied for my dissertation, you have these people. For example, if I take L2 science researchers, and I come and ask them, so what are your literacy practices? Like, how do you write research? They don't know how to answer me, because they are unaware of how they develop these literacy practices, because they studied English, they studied science in English from when they were little. But when I come and ask a French-speaking or an L3 science researcher, what are your literacy practices? They give them to me in detail. They tell me, for example, what I do is I copy sentences that I really like, and this is how I learn how to structure sentences, and this is how I learned how to write science research, and it's fascinating.
The difference between being comfortable in a language and it being a bit more foreign. Like, it affects the way that people will
approach
think
it, how you
that,
learn
yes.
it. Yeah, of
Which
course.
is why you actually find that a lot of people in Lebanon speak English, in my opinion, a bit better than people in America do, because they're much more focused on the grammatical details, like how sentences should be composed and this type of stuff. So I think it can be,
I think
an advantage sometimes.
I think not only are they better aware of the grammar or the mechanics of the language, but also there is this richness and vocabulary which lends itself to you being able to express better your ideas.
Yeah.
Your language is not. So if you listen to a conversation, like I face this. This is why I told you at the beginning. You know, my classmates at San Jose State used to tell me I sound like a book. Because I was able to maybe articulate my thoughts in
the best way possible,
using complex sentences. But the funny thing is that I also was the best speller in class, as in I would get an exam back and not have any spelling mistakes. When I was studying astronomy, I took this course with this astronomy professor, and he used to grade our essays. He used to grade grammar as well, like make mistakes and take out points for and so I used to get the highest grade in class because I'd never had these spelling mistakes or
was it because, like you mentioned before, you're like perfectionist, and even in language you try to like have that sort of perfection in that manner?
I think it's because I studied language in a different way. I despite the fact that I spoke English, you know, in Liberia, Liberia has its own English. You know, I don't want to use pidgin English. It's not a derogatory term, but it is. It's what we, you know, what is commonly referred to as. You know, like it's not a dialect, but more like the word just escaped my mind.
It's fine.
A vernacular. So the vernacular is very different because they speak what we call Liberian English. And right now in Lebanon, when I'm with my siblings, if we're somewhere out, you know, outside the house or even in the house, around the house, we speak in Liberian English, and nobody understands. Even though it's English. So I learned it at school. I learned it formally.
Yeah.
And when you learn it formally, instead of just like following, you know, it comes to you naturally when you're learning it without necessarily paying attention to the grammar. But if you study the structure, actually, you know what? I formally learned the grammar when I taught English.
Okay.
So I was tasked with a mechanics course when I first started teaching, and this is how I learned the grammar behind the language. You know how things are structured. I don't know. I went in a
But that's why language can be so interesting sometimes, because of how those dynamics operate, especially in your brain, which is why, of course, you're studying the neuro aspect of.
I'm interested in it.
I think that's a great point to end our conversation, even though we did face some technical difficulties. Thank you, Dr. Abir Ward, for coming on our podcast. And
thank you
we
for
really
having
enjoyed
me.
our time with you, and hopefully we'll do this again. There must be a sequel.
Yes.
For sure. I was very happy to be here, and it's so lovely to talk to you. It's very it felt very, you know, like a nice conversation, and you are such engaging hosts. Thank you for having
me. That's what we're trying to do.
I'm looking forward to coming here again and being with you on this podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please watch on all platforms. We're out on Spotify, on Hami, and on YouTube. So please watch us.
We're doing reverse psychology. Don't watch on all our platforms. Don't like, subscribe.
Don't do anything.